I worked the night shift for 20 years so my son could be a doctor. I scrubbed the floors of sleeping offices, my reflection the only company I kept, so he could walk the gleaming, sterile halls of a hospital. His thank you was to call me a financial burden and a dead weight in front of the very people he was so desperate to impress. He forgot one important thing about the woman he just threw away. The woman who cleans up the messes is the one who knows all the secrets. And I was about to remind him. Before I begin, thank you for being here. For being part of this community. If you believe in the power of a woman finding her voice and reclaiming her dignity, you are in the right place. Please, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. It means the world to me. Now let me tell you what they did to me. My name is Martha Evans. For the last 20 years, my world has begun when the rest of Chicago goes to sleep. My alarm clock is the distant wail of the L train heading away from the loop. A signal that the city's heart is emptying out, leaving the glass towers to me. At 62, my life is measured in the scent of industrial disinfectant and the profound, echoing silence of empty hallways. I am a night shift cleaner. It is not a job you dream of, but it is the one that fueled my son's dream, and for a long time that was enough. My kingdom is the 34th floor of the Sterling Price Financial Building. After midnight, its polished marble floors become a dark, silent lake, and I am the solitary rower crossing it, my mop my only oar. The weariness is a permanent resident in my bones. It lives in the deep ache in my lower back, a constant reminder of 20 years spent hunched over a bucket. It lives in the chapped, raw skin of my hands. No lotion can soothe the burn of 1,000 gallons of cleaning chemicals. It lives in the perpetual grit under my eyelids from a sleep schedule that has been at war with the sun for 2 decades. This body, this tired, aching body, is the price I paid for my son's future. I remember the promise. David was 10 years old, his eyes wide and brilliant, his small hands carefully stitching up a tear in his teddy bear's arm with a needle and thread I'd given him. He looked up at me, his face a mask of pure concentration, and said, "Mama, when I grow up, I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to fix people." In that moment, seeing the fierce intelligence and gentle spirit in my boy, I made a promise to myself. I would build a bridge out of my own back-breaking labor, and he would walk across it, away from our cramped apartment on the south side, away from the life of struggle that was my own, and into the world of healing he dreamed of. That promise became my religion. I was already working days at a laundromat, the steam and lint filling my lungs, but it wasn't enough. So I took the night shift job. 2 jobs. For a while, sleep was a luxury I caught in 30-minute increments on the bus between the two. Eventually, the night shift offered more hours and I clung to it. It was my secret weapon. While the world slept, I was fighting for my son's dream. Every single paycheck was a sacrament. I would cash it, and before I even thought of my own needs, I would perform the ritual. I'd sit at my small kitchen table with 3 envelopes. One for rent, the bare minimum to keep a roof over our heads. One for groceries, which for me meant instant noodles, day-old bread, and large bags of beans. The third, and always the fullest envelope, was labeled, David. That envelope held the cost of his life's launching. It paid for the better high school across town, a journey that added 2 hours to his day but put him in smaller classes. It paid for the tutors who helped him conquer calculus, a subject as foreign to me as a distant planet. It paid for the Kaplan course for his MCATs, a fee so large it made me physically sick to write the check. It paid for his application fees to a dozen medical schools. And then, when the acceptance letter from one of Chicago's finest medical schools arrived, that envelope began to swallow my entire life. Tuition. Books that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. A decent suit for his interviews. The fees for his board exams. I never told him the full cost. When he'd ask, I'd just wave a hand and say, "Don't you worry about it, baby. Your job is to study. My job is to take care of the rest." He never saw the eviction notices I'd narrowly avoid. He never knew that my dinners were often just a slice of bread with a scraping of margarine. He never saw me at 4 a.m. on my hands and knees scrubbing a stubborn stain from a lawyer's plush carpet, my tears of exhaustion mingling with the soapy water. He only saw the money appear in his bank account when he needed it. He saw the result, never the sacrifice. My only luxury, the only thing I ever bought for myself, was a new pair of comfortable, supportive shoes once a year. They were my most important tool. They were the foundation upon which his dream was built. I have walked 1,000 miles in circles on the floors of that silent, sleeping building. Each step, each ache, each lonely hour was a brick in the palace of his future. I was so proud of that palace. I never imagined that one day he would stand at its gates and refuse to let me in. The day I decided to visit him at the hospital was a Tuesday. For me, that meant it was a morning, the time I got home from my shift, my body humming with fatigue, the rising sun an unwelcome glare in my eyes. But on this particular Tuesday, a fierce, restless pride had kept me from my bed. Dr. David Evans. My son. He was a first-year surgical resident at Chicago General, a place that sounded to me like a castle in a fairy tale. I hadn't seen him in 3 weeks. His texts were brief, clipped, full of medical jargon I didn't understand and a constant refrain of "too busy." I knew he was working hard, I knew he was tired. And that's why I did it. I spent what little I had on the ingredients for his favorite meal, the gumbo my own mother had taught me to make. The rich, dark roux, the holy trinity of peppers, onions and celery, the spicy andouille sausage. It was a pot of love, a taste of home, a reminder of the boy who used to stitch up teddy bears, before he became the man who stitched up people. I packed it into a warm container, my heart swelling with a love so powerful it felt like it might crack my ribs. The hospital was even more intimidating than I had imagined. It was a world of gleaming white floors, hushed, urgent footsteps, and a smell that was a strange mix of antiseptic and something vaguely metallic. It was a place of life and death, of immense knowledge and quiet authority. I felt small and out of place in my worn but clean coat, my sensible shoes squeaking softly on the polished linoleum. I clutched the warm container to my chest like a shield. I asked a nurse at a large circular desk where I might find Dr. Evans. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering for a moment on my tired face and my simple clothes, before pointing down a long corridor. "He's on the surgical floor. 7 West. But residents are in rounds. He'll be busy." I thanked her and made my way to the 7th floor, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I found him. He was standing in a small group of other doctors, all of them looking impossibly young and serious in their blue scrubs. There was an older man with them, his white coat longer than the others, his face stern and commanding. David was listening to him, nodding intently, his face a mask of professional focus. He looked so handsome, so important. He looked like he belonged there. My soul flooded with a pride so pure it brought tears to my eyes. I waited patiently at a distance, not wanting to interrupt. After a few minutes, the group began to break up. This was my moment. A wide, joyful smile spread across my face. "David!" I called out, my voice a little too loud in the quiet hallway. He turned, and his name was a key turning in a lock. But the door that opened was not one of welcome. For a fraction of a second, I saw his eyes widen in recognition, and then just as quickly a shutter came down. His face tightened. The smile he had been sharing with a colleague vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated annoyance. He saw me, his mother, standing there with a plastic container, a relic from a world he was desperate to leave behind. He strode over to me, his movements sharp and angry. He didn't hug me. He didn't even smile. He grabbed my arm and pulled me into a small alcove, away from the eyes of the other doctors who were now glancing over with curiosity. "Mama, what are you doing here?" he hissed, his voice a low, furious whisper. "You can't just show up like this. This is a professional environment." The coldness in his voice was a slap. I was just worried about you, baby," I stammered, holding up the container. "I brought you some gumbo. I wanted to make sure you were eating a real meal." "I eat at the cafeteria like everyone else," he snapped, his eyes darting nervously back towards his colleagues. "This is not our kitchen on the south side. Look, people are staring." He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at my coat, at my shoes, at the plastic container in my hands. He was looking at everything that marked me as different from the polished, professional world he now inhabited. The pride that had filled my heart just moments before began to curdle into a sick, cold dread. He wasn't just busy. He was ashamed. He was ashamed of me. The hurt was so sharp and sudden it stole my breath. I stood there in the sterile alcove, the warm container of gumbo suddenly feeling heavy and foolish in my hands. My son, my David, was looking at me as if I were a stain on his clean white world. "I just wanted to see you," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You said you were working a 36-hour shift. A mother worries." A mother doesn't cause a scene at her son's job, he retorted, his voice still a low, angry hiss. His eyes kept flicking over my shoulder, back towards the nurse's station, back towards his colleagues. He was like a cornered animal, terrified of being seen with me. Just then, the very thing he feared happened. The older, stern-faced doctor, the one with the long white coat, ambled over. His eyes were sharp and curious. He looked from David's tense, furious face to my bewildered and wounded one. "Everything all right, Dr. Evans?" the older doctor asked, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable air of authority. This was his attending physician, the man David was so desperate to impress. This was David's moment of truth. He could have said, "Sir, this is my mother, Martha. She brought me lunch." He could have owned me. He could have owned the 20 years of sacrifice that had put him in that very hallway. But he didn't. He took a half step away from me, a small physical act of separation that shattered my heart into a million pieces. He cleared his throat, his posture stiffening into a formal, professional shell. "It's nothing, Dr. Albright," he said, his voice smooth and dismissive, a voice I didn't recognize. "Just a family financial issue. It's being handled." A financial issue. He had reduced me, his mother, the woman who had funded his entire existence, to a transaction. A problem to be managed. The blood drained from my face. I felt a cold wave of nausea. Dr. Albright raised an eyebrow, his gaze lingering on me for a moment before turning back to David. "Well, see that it is. We don't need distractions on this floor." He gave a curt nod and walked away. The moment he was out of earshot, the dam of David's composure broke, and a torrent of cruel, panicked fury poured out, directed entirely at me. He wasn't whispering anymore. His voice was a sharp, cutting weapon, and he didn't care who heard. "Do you see what you just did?" he seethed, his face contorted. "You made me look unprofessional. You made me look like I can't handle my own life. This is not some game, Mama. This is my career. The competition here is brutal. People look for any sign of weakness, any reason to think you don't belong." I'm sorry," I stammered, the words feeling useless. "I didn't mean." "You don't get it," he cut me off, his voice rising in pitch. "I am building a new life here. A life where I am Dr. Evans, not some kid from the South Side. I have responsibilities. I have a reputation to maintain. I have a mountain of student loan debt to pay off, thanks to this education." The mention of the debt I had worked my fingers to the bone to minimize for him, was a fresh stab of betrayal. "I can't keep carrying a financial burden," he said, the words striking me with the force of a physical blow. He gestured vaguely at me, at my worn coat, at the life of poverty I represented. "You're becoming a dead weight. Financial burden. Dead weight." The words hung in the sterile air of the hospital corridor. They echoed in the space between us, a space that now felt like a vast, unbridgeable canyon. He had taken my 20 years of love, of sacrifice, of sleepless nights and aching bones, and he had twisted it into an anchor that was dragging him down. I wasn't the foundation he stood on. I was a weight around his neck. I looked at my son, at his handsome face, now ugly with a rage born of shame. I saw a stranger. A cold, calculating stranger who had weighed his mother's love against his own ambition and found it wanting. The container of gumbo slipped from my numb fingers and clattered to the floor. The lid popped off, and the rich, dark stew, the smell of home and love, spilled across the gleaming white linoleum. A messy, unwanted stain. Just like me. Without another word, I turned and walked away. I didn't run. My pride, what was left of it, wouldn't let me. I walked, my back straight, my eyes staring straight ahead, blurring with tears I refused to let fall. I walked past the nurse's station, past the curious glances of the staff who had heard everything. I walked towards the elevator, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. He had called me a dead weight. And in that moment I felt like he had killed me. The elevator doors felt like they were a mile away. Each step was a monumental effort, my sensible shoes feeling like blocks of lead. The hallway stretched before me, a tunnel of white walls and fluorescent lights, the air thick with my public humiliation. I could feel the stares of the hospital staff on my back, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. I was the cleaner's coat mother of the arrogant young doctor. The dead weight. The financial burden. I reached the elevator bank and pressed the down button, my hand trembling. I stared at the polished steel doors, seeing a distorted, wavering reflection of a tired, broken old woman. The tears I had held back now burned behind my eyes, threatening to spill over. I felt hollowed out, erased. My son had taken my life's work, the very meaning of my existence for the past 20 years, and had declared it worthless. Worse than worthless. A liability. Just as the elevator doors chimed, a voice calm and steady cut through my haze of pain. "Ma'am." I turned. It was a nurse, a black woman who looked to be in her late 50s. Her name tag read Brenda, RN. She had been at the nurse's station. She had heard everything. I braced myself for a look of pity, a condescending platitude. But her eyes held something else entirely. They held a deep, quiet anger and an even deeper understanding. She stepped closer, her presence a solid, comforting warmth. She didn't offer a tissue or a meaningless, "Are you okay?" Instead, she glanced down at my hands, which were clenched into tight, white-knuckled fists at my sides. "I saw your hands," she said, her voice low but clear, meant only for me. "They look just like my mother's did. She worked 2 jobs to put me through nursing school. Cleaned hotel rooms in the morning, worked the line at a factory in the afternoon." She paused, her gaze lifting to meet mine. "You did a good thing," she said, her voice firm with conviction. "The rest is on him." Her words were not a comfort. They were a validation. They were a steel rod slid down my spine. This woman, this respected professional in her crisp uniform, a leader on this floor where my son was just a novice, saw me. She didn't see a burden. She saw her own mother. She saw the sacrifice. She saw the value in my chapped skin and my aching bones. She saw my worth. In that single powerful moment of recognition, the crushing weight of my shame began to lift, replaced by something else. Something hard and cold and clear. It was anger. A righteous, diamond-hard fury that burned away the tears before they could fall. He had called me a dead weight. He who had been carried on my back for 29 years. He had called me a financial burden. He whose every achievement was paid for by the sweat of my labor. He thought I was weak. He thought I was ignorant. He thought my world was limited to a mop and a bucket. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside, and as the doors slid shut, I looked at Nurse Brenda and gave her a small, firm nod. A nod of thanks. A nod of understanding. A nod of promise. As the elevator descended, my mind, once clouded with a mother's unconditional, forgiving love, became a machine of cold, clear logic. My son was a doctor. He lived in a world of rules, of procedures, of liability. He worked for a massive institution, a corporation with a pristine public image to protect. An image of competence, stability, and unimpeachable character in its physicians. And what did I know? I knew institutions. For 20 years, I had moved through the hidden world of a massive downtown building. I knew its rhythms after dark. I knew the cleaning schedules, the supply closets, the security blind spots. I knew the language of maintenance reports and incident logs. I knew that for all their power, these giant buildings, these giant corporations were terrified of 2 things: lawsuits and bad publicity. A plan began to form, not from a place of emotional rage, but from a place of cold, calculated expertise. My expertise. The expertise of the invisible woman who cleans up the messes. He had used his world, the world of medicine and status, to humiliate me. I would use my world, the world of logistical knowledge and institutional pressure points, to reclaim my dignity. He thought my knowledge was worthless. He was about to find out how wrong he was. By the time the elevator reached the ground floor, the heartbroken mother who had entered it on the 7th floor was gone. In her place stood Martha Evans, a strategist. My son had made a critical error. He had forgotten that the person who cleans the floors is the one who knows exactly where all the structural weaknesses are. And I was about to point them out. I did not go home to cry. I went home and slept for 8 solid hours, a deep, dreamless sleep I hadn't known in years. When I woke, the sun was setting, the time my body usually prepared for work. But I felt a profound calm. The grief was still there, a hard stone in my chest, but it was no longer a crushing weight. It was a whetstone, and I was sharpening my resolve against it. My revenge would not be a screaming match. It would not be an emotional plea. It would be a series of calm, quiet, and devastatingly professional maneuvers. It would be a lesson taught in the language my son and his new world understood, the language of bureaucracy, liability, and career-threatening consequences. The next day, I took a small portion of my meager savings and made an appointment with a lawyer from a legal aid clinic. I didn't need a high-powered attorney. I just needed someone to help me draft a document and ensure the language was precise and legally sound. I explained the situation to a young, sharp-eyed woman who listened with a growing look of disbelief and then a slow, determined smile. Together we drafted an invoice. It was a work of art. It was not a bill for the money I had spent. That was a gift, and a gift once given is gone. This was an invoice for services rendered. At the top it read, "Invoice for professional support services. Billed to Dr. David Evans, surgical resident, Chicago General Hospital. Billed from Martha Evans, logistical support and home environment management." Then came the itemized list. Item: overnight logistical and support services enabling pre-medical and medical studies. Description: provision of a stable, secure and distraction-free home environment, including all maintenance, cleaning and meal preparation, specifically scheduled during overnight hours to facilitate clients' uninterrupted study. Duration: September 2004 to May 2024, 20 years. Total nights of service: 7,305. Rate: calculated at Illinois minimum wage for each respective year. Total amount due: a staggering six-figure number that was both factually accurate and breathtakingly large. At the bottom in the notes section we added a single chilling sentence. As per the client's verbal classification of this arrangement as a financial burden and dead weight, all implicit familial support is hereby reclassified as a professional service contract, effective immediately. Payment is due within 30 days. But the invoice was only the first arrow in my quiver. The second was a letter. I wrote it myself, my handwriting clear and steady. It was addressed not to my son, but to the two people in the hospital who would care most about this situation: the Chief of Risk Management and the Vice President of Human Resources. I sent it via certified mail requiring a signature. "Dear Sir/Madam," it began, "I am writing to you today as the mother of one of your first-year surgical residents, Dr. David Evans. For the past 20 years, I have worked to provide the sole financial and logistical support for my son's education, a journey that has culminated in his position at your esteemed hospital. However, during a recent visit, Dr. Evans informed me in the presence of his colleagues and attending physician that he now considers my support to be a financial burden and that I am a dead weight to him. While this is a painful personal matter, it has raised a significant professional concern that I feel duty-bound to report. A physician's ability to perform their duties, especially in a high-stress surgical environment, depends on their stability and judgment. Dr. Evans's extreme and unprofessional outbursts suggest he may be under significant unresolved personal and financial stressors. As the person he has identified as his primary burden, I am concerned that his focus may not be entirely on his patients. I have formally invoiced him for my 2 decades of support services to resolve this financial matter between us. However, I felt it was my ethical responsibility to make the hospital administration aware of a potential issue that could, however remotely, impact patient care and the hospital's liability. I trust you will handle this information with the discretion and seriousness it warrants. Sincerely, Martha Evans. I had not accused him of anything. I had not demanded anything from the hospital. I had simply done my duty as a concerned citizen, using their own corporate buzzwords: risk management, liability, fitness for duty. I had planted a seed of doubt in the most fertile ground imaginable. The explosion came 4 days later. The phone call was not from a calm, professional Dr. Evans. It was from a panicked, screaming David. "What did you do?" he shrieked, his voice cracking with fury and terror. "They pulled me into a meeting. Sure. The chief of surgery. They're talking about a mandatory psychological evaluation. They're putting me on administrative review. An invoice? A letter about my stressors? You've ruined me. You've ended my career before it even started." I let him scream. I listened to the tirade, the accusations, the pathetic, self-serving justifications. When he finally ran out of breath, I spoke, my voice as calm and quiet as the 34th floor at 3 a.m. "A burden is something you carry, David," I said softly. "You carry it until it gets too heavy and then you set it down. You told me I was a burden, so I'm just setting it down. You're on your own now." I hung up the phone. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel joy. I felt a profound, quiet, and unshakable sense of peace. For the first time in 20 years I was no longer carrying him. I was free. The fallout at the hospital was not loud and dramatic. It was quiet and devastating, a slow, creeping rot that infected my son's budding career. The formal review triggered by my letter put David under a microscope. He was no longer the brilliant golden boy. He was a risk, a potential liability, a man who had shown questionable judgment and a profound lack of character under pressure. His attending physician, Dr. Albright, became distant and cool. The easy camaraderie he had shared with his fellow residents evaporated, replaced by whispers and wary glances. He was assigned less challenging cases. His path to a prestigious surgical fellowship, once a near certainty, was now shrouded in doubt. He had not been fired. He had been sidelined. In the competitive, high-stakes world of academic medicine, he had been marked as damaged goods. He had wanted so desperately to impress them, but my quiet, carefully worded letter had revealed a truth about his character that no amount of medical knowledge could hide. I never heard from him directly again. The invoice went unpaid as I knew it would. Its purpose was not to collect money, but to serve as a formal, documented declaration of my independence. It was the closing of a ledger that had been unbalanced for 2 decades. The most significant change, however, happened within me. The day after that final phone call, I went to the office of my supervisor at the cleaning company. For the first time in 20 years I did not clock in. I handed her my resignation letter. The feeling of walking out of that building in the evening with the sun still in the sky was a freedom so profound it made me dizzy. My life was no longer governed by the rhythms of other people's sleeping schedules. It was my own. The first few weeks were strange. I slept at night and the world seemed new and full of color. I had my meager savings, the money I had always kept for a true catastrophe. I realized this was it. The catastrophe had happened and I had survived. It was time to build. I didn't want to clean other people's messes anymore. I wanted to build something clean for myself. Thought about what I knew. I knew the unique challenges of medical facilities. I knew about sanitation protocols, about biohazard disposal, about the specific needs of clinical environments. I had spent years observing the specialized cleaning crews that came into the medical offices in my building. My knowledge wasn't just about mops and buckets. It was specialized. I used my savings to start a business. It was a tiny one-woman operation. I bought professional-grade supplies, had business cards printed, and took out a small liability insurance policy. I called it Martha's Medical Clean. My first clients were small, local doctors' offices and dental clinics. Places that couldn't afford the big corporate cleaning services but needed someone who understood the importance of a truly sterile environment. I was good at it. I was reliable, meticulous, and I knew what I was doing. My reputation grew by word of mouth. Within 6 months I had to hire my first employee. The story ends here in my small apartment on the south side. Still the same apartment, but it feels different. It's brighter. On the wall where a calendar of my son's exam schedules used to hang, there is now a simple framed document. It's my business license. It is not a medical degree from a fancy university. It is not a symbol of high status or intellectual brilliance. But it is mine. It was earned not through 20 years of silent, invisible sacrifice for someone else, but through my own expertise, my own resilience, and my own hard work. I am no longer the dead weight. I am no longer the financial burden. I am the founder. My son wanted to be a man who healed people, but he broke the one person who gave him the power to do so. I, on the other hand, spent my life cleaning up messes, and I finally cleaned up the biggest one of all, the one in my own life. I had reclaimed my dignity not by destroying my son, but by finally, after 20 years, building a life for myself. And that clean, quiet, well-earned peace is worth more than any doctor's salary. It is priceless.